West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
Joining me now is National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Jake, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. I know how busy and heartbreaking the last week has been in the White House. I just want to start with the timeline here. We're still all bracing for a full-scale ground offensive. We're waiting for updates from the Israelis. What is your expectation in the White House right now? Is it hours? Is it days? Could it even be farther away from that than that?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. To your question, I'll let the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, make any announcements or statements they want to make with respect to the next phase of their military operation. I won't characterize it from here, but we are, of course, in daily, hourly contact with our Israeli counterparts to learn more, but it's not my place to share that publicly.
There are still more than 150 hostages held by Hamas, some of them Americans. How concerned are you about their safety once a ground offensive launches?
We are concerned. We're concerned about their safety even now because they're in the hands of brutal and vicious terrorists. And we are doing everything in our power to secure the release of the American hostages, of all the hostages. President Biden has sent hostage experts to coordinate with their Israeli counterparts on recovery efforts. We're working through third countries on potential avenues for their release. And I need to be cautious about how much more I say in that regard because we are pursuing a number of different pathways, but you'll understand that we need to keep those discreet in hopes that we actually can achieve the safe release of Americans and others, but the president has no higher priority than to make this happen.
There's always so much work going on behind the scenes, even when there's not updates being given. Your counterpart, your Israeli counterpart, did say this week that there will be no negotiations over hostages. I know Secretary Blinken is out talking to countries that talk to Hamas, but if Israel says the channel is closed, could there still be a negotiation, a diplomatic path?
Look, like I said, I have to be cautious about how I discuss our conversations, both with Israel and with third countries, with respect to avenues to secure the release of hostages. And I'm not going to characterize Israel's position or how it will proceed. I will only say this. We are leaving no stone unturned in trying to figure out a way to get the Americans and all of the other hostages back safely. We're not going to rest until we have taken every conceivable effort to make that happen. And if we have anything further to update you on, we will, of course, do so. In the meantime, we're going to keep our heads down and keep working at it.
The president spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday. He's obviously been in very regular contact with him. There were reports this morning in the New York Times that Israel has a specific plan to take Gaza City and destroy Hamas leaders. What is your understanding of what their ultimate goal or end goal is as they're moving forward with this ground offensive?
their goal is a safe and secure democratic and Jewish state of Israel that is not subject to constant, brutal, vicious terrorist attack from the south or the north or the west or anywhere else. More immediately, it is to try to eliminate the terrorist infrastructure of Hamas and to take out the leaders of Hamas so that they no longer represent a threat to Israel or to the Jewish people. Now, there are then more immediate operational objectives that go into the military planning for how to get there. But fundamentally, the goal is to eliminate the threat that Hamas poses to the state of Israel, and they are undertaking a military campaign to make that happen.
Hamas, of course, would not exist without Iran. Do you think that they can be defeated militarily by a military offensive into Gaza?
You're right. Iran, as we have said from the beginning, is broadly complicit in these attacks because for years it has funded, trained, supported Hamas, and has, as recently as yesterday, gone out publicly, having met with Hamas's leaders and praised what they have done, this horrific, barbaric set of attacks that went after women and children, even babies. And this is absolutely unconscionable for any nation to take a stand on behalf of this kind of slaughter. We believe that Israel can be successful in dealing a devastating blow to Hamas. They are working on that now as we speak, and we are supporting them in that effort because Israel has not just a right to defend itself against this kind of terrorism, but, as the president said, a duty to defend itself against this kind of terrorism.
As you know, the United Nations has said, and other health organizations have said, that the evacuation that Israel has called for from northern Gaza is basically impossible, that it would pose a significant humanitarian risk. So the other issue, of course, as you know very well, is the fear of people there, many of whom are refugees themselves from past wars, won't be able to return. Are there any assurances the United States has asked for from Israel that they'll be able to return to northern Gaza after the offensive?
Well, we are in daily, indeed, as I said before, hourly contact with the Israelis, with the United Nations, with the Egyptians, with the Jordanians on ensuring that there are safe places for civilians to go. And when they go there, that they have access to the basic needs they have of food, of water, of medicine, of shelter. And we're going to keep working actively, aggressively on that. Secretary Blinken has been in the region. He's in Egypt today working on this issue. As well as consulting on a range of other matters, too. When it comes to the question of people actually leaving Gaza as opposed to going to safe places in Gaza, we have an active conversation happening with regional partners. We have an active conversation happening with the Israelis. We're not at the point yet for seeking particular assurances of one kind or another. What I will say is that ultimately we need safe places for people to go. And then, of course, civilians in Gaza deserve the right to return to their homes. So that's not a question for us, but the conversation is still in the stage of working out where a safe area can be established and how we can ensure that that safe area is fully stocked with the necessary humanitarian supplies.
Secretary Blinken is on his way to Egypt, probably in Egypt at this point. Yesterday, we saw reports that the Rafah crossing was not open, even though there was an expectation it would be. Is there leverage, such as military aid or assistance, the United States would be willing to use in order to get that crossing open?
The U.S. is going to work around the clock until American citizens who live in Gaza are able to leave Gaza, are able to get safe passage out through that border crossing from Gaza into Egypt. And I don't think we've reached the point where, we have to make threats of the kind I think you're implying. We are going to continue to work it, and we have a collaborative conversation going with the Israelis and with the Egyptians, and now it's a matter of just being able to execute a game plan to actually move the American citizens across that border.
There has been, the president has repeated many times, as have you, as have other national security officials, that the U.S. is going to offer any support Israel needs in terms of assistance, military equipment. I know you've said no troops on the ground. Is it possible that U.S. forces could be involved in training in any capacity, or is that something that remains on the table as a possibility?
Well, the ground offensive and the aerial campaign and the other steps that the Israelis have been discussing both publicly and privately, that involves Israeli forces, not American forces. And we don't expect that to change as they continue to go after the Hamas terrorist infrastructure. And the United States, the form of support that we are providing is to get them the capabilities they need, including ammunition as well as interceptors for their Iron Dome system so that they can continue to protect their cities against Hamas rocket attacks falling down on civilian areas. So that is where our support is focused at this time. I can't speak to every conceivable hypothetical, but I will say that the Israeli operation currently being contemplated is just that, an operation being conducted by Israeli forces, not by American forces.
Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you about, we've seen photos and video of President Biden speaking to the families of American hostages in Gaza. I mean, I've been in the room for emotional conversations he has. You've been in the room for many. Just on a personal level, what was that like, being in the room for that?
It was hard to sit and listen to people who are enduring the most unimaginable pain, the pain of not knowing where their loved one is, what is happening to them. And it was just an absolutely gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching experience, one that's actually been difficult for me to tell other people about. And President Biden, he spent more than an hour and a half on the call with those families, listening to them, comforting them, sharing his own stories. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it was one of the most remarkable displays I've seen of his leadership, his compassion at a moment of just absolute torture for these families. And it drove home for me that this isn't about policy or strategy. This is about people and this conflict. This brutal terrorist attack we saw, it ultimately comes down to the people that it is, whose lives it has shattered. And we are going to do everything we can to ensure this kind of thing cannot happen again.
It is Monday, the 16th of October of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious is our little Yorkie, and she is the door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, River City Hash Mondays. What day is it? It's Monday, that's right, and on Mondays we make a hash. And what is a hash? Well, of course, we combine everything that was left over from the weekend and repurpose it. Well, I guess that's one way of putting it, but we make it into a gourmet delight, indeed, because that's how we do it on Mondays. And we'll continue to do it that way because, hey, why not? So how was your weekend? We had a fairly nice weekend, a little bit of sunshine, a little bit of drying out, and now it is beginning to rain again. And it looks like we may get a quarter to a half inch of rain, and we would like that. Reports is that El Nino will be hitting very strong this year, which could be not necessarily a good thing. It will bring copious amounts of precipitation, but it could melt our snowpack, and we don't want that. We need the snowpack. So looking forward to having some rain, but we don't want to melt our snowpack as we get into the throes of winter. Nope. Okay, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. Okay, I, of course, as you know, have to put myself into a bubble, a news blockout bubble, because we can only, deal with what we have at hand. We have to make a decision, and this is it. But I don't know the outcome yet, or will we? Maybe not today. But regardless, Trump is in front of Chunkin He's not. But the special counsel is arguing for a gag order. And part of his evidence is that Trump put out a public call to execute Miley. I mean, the guy's got to be gagged. And I mean like an actual gag. God. If we're going to follow the law and they impose a gag order, shouldn't we stuff a rag in this guy's mouth? Not down his throat. We don't want to disrupt his breathing now. Okay. But shut the guy up. Shouldn't we? I was wondering if we could put one of those muzzles like they did on Hannibal Lecter, but then I realized, that doesn't really shut him up. It just keeps him from biting people. And I think that's next. That's coming up. He's off the deep end. But man, Joe is the one who's just so... He is mentally diminished. Oh my God. But then you look at him on the 60 Minutes interview with Paley. Yep. This is the guy that was able to go and provide a shoulder to cry on. And not in any pandering way, but in a very heartfelt way, because Joe knows what loss is. And it's not like this other fellow whose idea of a loss is only transactional. Okay. Did he really cry when Ivana died? What was the first thing he did? I'm going to bury her with a bunch of documents here on my golf course. Right by the first tee, over here in the weeds. And everybody goes, oh, well, that's normal. That's normal. All right. And you got pundits out there not questioning that behavior, not questioning the just unhinged ranting and out violent threats made against judges, prosecutors, jurors, just random people on the street. They're thugs. Go after them. He seems to get a lot of positive press out of it. It's his right, they say. But Kamala and Joe get run through the ringer. Run. Yep. Well, kind of makes you wonder about the liberal press. I don't know if there is such a thing, at least not on the corporate model. Jeez. On the other hand, you got Elon Musk effing up one of the most important communication devices, services, platforms in the history of the world. Very democratic, and I mean the people were involved in it. And now he's made it so that you can't tell what the truth is. And that's exactly what they mean to do. So you had any number of reports of this or that, and you would think it was from a reputable source, but it wasn't. So I've been holding off sharing, the more sensational reportings or pictures of dead babies, just dead people in general on the battlefield. I don't like to dwell on that with the Ukraine issue. I do not like sharing these drone photos of a drone coming down and killing a bunch of people. I don't care if they're the enemy or not. I just find no glee in looking at that. And it turns out that any number of reportings or pictures that were purported to have been inside Gaza turned out to be from Syria from several years ago, killed by Russians. This is what the Israelis do. This is what the Americans do. And it turns out not to be anything near Gaza. It's in Syria. I'm not sharing any of it. I don't know where it's coming from. Got to let this stuff shake out a little bit. But I will say this. I don't like the idea of moving on from several hundred kids slaughtered at a music festival. grandmas, grandpas, which I'm a grandpa. Okay, I don't really feel that old, but now that I think about it, I'm kind of. Moms, babies, all dragged out of bed in their bare feet and summarily executed. We've moved on from that crime. Give me a break. Now, I'm not for like the dad going into a courthouse and, killing the guy that raped his daughter. I don't like that. But I won't say I understand it. But there is an anger to lash out. And we do have laws to sort of mitigate that so that the dad doesn't go in there and kill somebody in the courthouse, in the courtroom. Please. So I read an article that Egypt was actually going to open up that crossing there into Egypt. And I'm thinking, well, it's about time because, it's Egypt that's prevented the people of Gaza to be able to freely move about. That's why they're locked in. Well, it turns out that it was only for Western evacuees, press, etc. It'd be nice if it was opened up for the general population to be able to get out of the way of the bombs falling. Because if Hamas is dug in, I don't want to go through a bunch of civilians to get to Hamas and say, oh, well, that's just what we had to do, collateral damage. Any number of reports where there was an explosion on the convoy out or to the south, blamed on Israeli missiles. But I know a little bit about explosions and how video works and all that, and it sure looked like a gas explosion from an IED on the side of the road. Missiles make different kinds of craters and cause different kinds of damage, but a firebomb, an incendiary device with shrapnel, does something entirely different. But then you got, I don't know, any number of people who rightfully are concerned about the Palestinian issue, the danger to civilians, no matter what side. But that reportage is questioned. Oh, that's not what really happened. That was really an Israeli missile. Okay, well, I don't think so. From what I know and from what experts who have more expertise than I do say, it sure looks like an IED by the side of the road, not a missile. So we got that to deal with. The absolute purposeful misinformation. It seems to be working. Because we got people who are active participants for the Russian cause. And I'm looking at you, Rand Paul, and others. Who seem to be taking an entirely different tack in all of this. And we know why. Okay. Enough pontificating. It's only Monday. I've got a whole week to pontificate. Why don't we give you a rundown on what we have in store for you as part of the curated aspect of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, because that's what we do at this salon. We curate. Okay, on the rest of the menu, and of course, that was at the top. The U.S. is working through third countries. I think he meant third-party countries, but nonetheless, working with those third-party countries for the release of hostages held by Hamas, and not just American hostages. Okay, it's not important because we're in it. It's important because it's important. Okay, On the rest of the menu, a Supreme Court dispute over a $15,000 IRS bill may be aimed at a never-enacted tax on billionaires. Yeah, they're looking ahead. That never-enacted tax might be enacted, and we got to stop it. And they may with this court. A suspended Miami City Commissioner, friends of DeSantis, by the way, pleaded not guilty to money laundering and other charges. And an executive who had business ties to Playgirl magazine pleaded guilty to a $250 million fraud scheme at one of his lending companies. I wonder what happened at the others. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Greece's ruling Conservative Party suffered serious setbacks in Sunday's regional and municipal elections. That's how they do it in other countries. They have elections on days off. And announcing that reconciliation is dead, Indigenous Australians vowed a week of silence after the landmark equality referendum was decisively defeated. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page, is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across to the left from that chat room link that's near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon site. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if maybe you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso type coffee drink, it really helps us pay the bills around here, which are ever increasing. Now, of course, though the bulk of how we pay for this powerhouse of resistance comes out of our own wallets, we would be unable to do it without you. And we thank those of you who have been so generous in sending us what they might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, once a month. That's right. Thereby becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. And that generosity has allowed us for 13 years and counting to be able to be this powerhouse of resistance. And do we ever need all the resistance that we can muster? So thank you for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, it will always be called Twitter. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. And also on Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, you can follow even on Facebook. You can follow us at Netroots Radio. And Tom takes care of those, except for Facebook. I think Kelly mostly addresses or takes care of that. So nonetheless, Tom takes care of most of the social media platforms and a lot of other things as well as Kelly. So thank you both. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, etc., follow me at Justice Putnam or simply Justice Putnam, depending. And you know what depending means. And I also, as you know, post the show, or if you don't, I'll tell you. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. And that's where you can actually read the actual reportage from the reporting that we are drawing such great inspiration from. So it's all there for you. And if you follow my social media feeds, you'll be able to quickly be linked up. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. Did I say Stitcher is no longer in Stitcher? Darn it. Because you know why. But you can find us most anywhere. And do pick up those podcasts. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe comes out of the Associated Press by Mark Sherman. Charles and Kathleen Moore are about to have their day in the Supreme Court over a $15,000 tax bill. That's just $15,000, not 50, 15. And they contend that tax bill is unconstitutional. The couple from Redmond, Washington, claim they had to pay the money because of their investment in an Indian company from which, as Charles Moore, age 62, said in a sworn statement, they never received a distribution, dividend, or other payment. But significant parts of the story they have told to reach this point seems at odds with the public records. Yep, it's another one of these right-wing, let's look for a court case that we can take to the Supreme Court. And this is another one of those. Let's go on. The Moores are the public face of a high court case backed by business and conservative political interests that could call into question other parts of the U.S. tax code and rule out a much-discussed but never enacted tax on wealth. And the case is set for arguments on December 5th. The Moores are the latest example of plaintiffs whose lawsuits seem to simply be exercising their legal rights, but whose cases are backed by others with enormous amounts of money or a consequential social issue at stake. The Moores sought help from the Anti-Regulatory Competitive Enterprise Institute. Oh, we've seen them lots of times. Underscoring the case's importance at a recent Heritage Foundation event, lawyer Paul Clement said, "The constitutionality of a wealth tax may well be decided in the context of this case." Really? Details of the Moores' involvement with the company initially called KissenCraft, or KissenCraft Machine Tools Private Limited, was first reported by Tax Notes, which caters to tax professionals. The public documents are filings with the Indian government. At issue in the case is a provision of the 2017 tax bill enacted by a Republican-controlled Congress and signed by then President Donald Trump. The law applies to companies that are owned by Americans but do their business in foreign countries. It imposes a one-time tax on investors' share of profits that have not been passed along to them in order to offset other tax benefits. The measure is expected to generate $340 billion with a B in tax revenues. The Moores, along with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and conservative think tanks, contend that the provision violates the 16th Amendment, which allows the federal government to impose an income tax on Americans. The $15,000 tax bill was for Moore's share of KissenCraft's profits. If you haven't received any income, how can you be required to pay income taxes? Charles Moore asked in a video posted by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. But far from being a passive investor with no influence over the company, Moore, who worked at Microsoft during his career in software development, served on KissenCraft's board of directors for 5 years. Weekend staff at the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. A suspended Miami City Commissioner who is accused of accepting $245,000 in exchange for voting to approve construction of a sports facility, has pleaded not guilty to multiple felony charges, including bribery and money laundering. Alex Diaz de la Portilla did not appear in court on Friday, but his attorney, Ben Kuhn, entered the plea forum. Diaz de la Portilla and a co-defendant, Miami attorney William Riley Jr., were arrested on September 14th. Governor Ron DeSantis suspended Diaz de la Portilla, who is a fellow Republican and actually a friend. After the commissioner's arrest, Kuhn said on Friday that his client was campaigning for the November 7 election to keep his seat on the commission. Oh no, more election interference. Kuhn requested that Diaz de la Portilla be tried separately from Riley. On Friday, Riley's attorney also entered a not guilty plea for his client, who did not appear in court. Riley is accused of being the front for the business that allegedly gave money to Diaz de la Portilla and his campaign in exchange for the right to build a sports facility on land that is now a downtown city park. Staff at the weekend desk at the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Florida executive whose family business once owned Playgirl magazine has pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit securities fraud for misleading investors in another of his companies, one that made high-interest loans to small businesses. Carl R. Rudderman, aged 82, was chairman and chief executive officer of One Global Capital, LLC, a commercial lending company that filed for bankruptcy in July of 2018. Federal authorities said he took part in a $250 million scheme that affected more than 3,400 investors in 42 states. Rudderman pleaded guilty on Thursday in federal court in Miami. Court records show sentencing is for January 3rd, and he faces up to 5 years in prison and forfeiture of more than $250 million. Rudderman admitted spending One Global investors' money on credit card payments, vacation travel, drivers, nannies, housekeepers, tuition, mortgage payments, luxury car payments, and insurance payments for his art collection and jewelry, the Justice Department said in a news release on Friday. Well, okay, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
For Science Quickly, I'm Christopher Intagliata. Indonesia's more than 17,000 islands contain the largest expanse of tropical rainforest in Southeast Asia, and they're teeming with biodiversity.
These forests are just incredibly rich.
Conservation scientist Eric Maynard has worked for more than 3 decades in these forests. He heads up the scientific consulting company Borneo Futures.
Of course, it's hot and sweaty and humid, but there's so much diversity in these forests. There's bird calls everywhere.
Everywhere you look, you see life.
Bill Lawrence is a tropical ecologist at James Cook University in Australia.
The forests are just festooned with plants and animals and birds and everything just chirping away, and it's just this giant bastion of life.
That life is on the brink because Lawrence says Indonesia has an incredible concentration of the world's endangered and critically endangered species.
It's sort of an incredible, magical place in one sense, but it's also a place that's greatly imperiled right now.
And then there's another sort of peril, one facing the scientists who do conservation work there. That's the topic of a recent letter Lawrence and Maynard published in the journal Current Biology. Writing with a couple Indonesian colleagues, they warn that conservation science in the island nation is under threat.
We were seeing colleagues and researchers that we knew and respected that were being essentially booted out of Indonesia,
including Maynard himself.
We published a critical letter in an Indonesian newspapers where we questioned the Ministry of Forestry and Environment's statements about growing orangutan populations. And we said, look, we've been looking at this problem for over 30 years and orangutan populations are simply not growing. All 3 species of orangutans are in continuous decline.
He says the government responded quickly by banning him and his colleagues from doing research in the country. A leaked letter from the Indonesian Ministry of Environment and Forestry instructs the country's national parks not to work with Maynard or approve his research requests, saying his writings could, quote, discredit the government.
And it's really made it much more difficult for us to collaborate with foreign and Indonesian scientists working on conservation issues in Indonesia.
We reached out to the Indonesian government, but have not, at time of publication, received a response. The scientist's paper in Current Biology points out that Indonesia is far from the only country suppressing scientific work. They cite examples from Turkey, Sweden, the US, and Australia too. But in a nation like Indonesia, with so much biodiversity on the brink, the stakes for endangered species are especially high.
If everyone says that orangutan populations are growing and no one is in a position to question that, then orangutan populations are growing.
And that perception becomes reality, he says.
Without independent science, the government and other groups can completely change the narrative and generate fake realities around what is happening.
And in a world where fake realities have been used to discredit life-saving vaccines or to undermine free and fair elections, it's easy to imagine how fake realities about the state of Indonesia's forests could have very real repercussions for critically endangered species. Science Quickly is produced by Jeff Delvicio, Talika Bose, Kelso Harper, and Corinne Leon. Our theme music was composed by Dominic Smith. Don't forget to subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. For more in-depth science news and features, go to scientificamerican.com. And if you liked the show, give us a rating or review. For Science Quickly, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? By their clothes, their age, the way they speak? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a single father of 2 who works 3
part-time jobs and still can't put enough food on the table?
Or maybe a mother who cleans offices at night,
hoping to find meeting leftovers to take home to her hungry family.
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet.
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. People you pass by every day but never knew were hungry. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America, 200 Food Banks Strong, and the Ad Council.
This is the story of a very special woman. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician or an entrepreneur. Her knowledge was limitless and still is. She could also make monsters disappear, especially those that lurked in the shadows under the bed. Once, this woman put back together a teenage girl's broken heart, which had been shattered in 1,000 pieces, just by giving her a bear hug. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. On the heels of a statewide referendum on an expansion of voting rights in 2022, this November, voters in 3 Michigan cities consider adopting ranked choice voting for municipal elections. Kalamazoo, East Lansing, and Royal Oak vote November 7th on ranked choice voting ballot initiatives led by Rank the Vote Michigan. There are currently 47 cities around the U.S. which use it, also known as instant runoff voting. It's used in Ann Arbor and 2 other Michigan municipalities already, and was historically used in Kalamazoo between 1918 and 1920. Voters would rank their choice of candidates for municipal elections in order of preference. If one candidate receives 50% plus 1 first-place votes, that candidate is the winner. If 50% isn't reached, the lowest vote-getting candidate is eliminated, and votes are recalculated using the second and third choices until a majority winner is reached. Since Kalamazoo's adoption of RCV over 100 years ago, computers now make the recalculations within minutes, making the process more practical. After Alaska's implementation in 2022, 80% of voters surveyed found the system easy to use, and in 2018, 97% of voters in Maine ranked 3 or more candidates properly. Michigan's voter registration deadline is October 24th, with local election officials or on Election Day at the polls. Learn more at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1979. That was the day that the United Nations established the idea of holding an annual World Food Day. The aim of the day is to bring global attention to the problem of hunger and build international solidarity to fight the problem. The first World Food Day was observed 2 years later. One feature of the day is a teleconference that brings together some of the world's top experts in the field of agriculture, nutrition, and human rights. Each year, a different theme is chosen for the day. For the first 2 years, the theme was simple: food comes first. In 1984, the chosen theme was women in agriculture. Women were again the focus in 1998 with the theme Women Feed the World. In 1986, the day featured fishermen and fishing communities. Small farmers were the theme in 1987, and in 2014, the theme was family farming, feeding the world, caring for the earth. That year, the United Nations declared 2014 International Year of Family Farming. A UN report found that 500 million family farms make up over 98% of farming holdings, and were responsible for at least 56% of agricultural production. In the United States, family farmers produced 84% of all produce. The website for the 2014 2014 World Food Day in the United States and Canada recognized the importance of family farm workers. It stated, quote, "And yet, despite their critical importance, a large majority of family farmers are among the world's most vulnerable populations. Ironically, it's not uncommon for many of the families who produce food to actually go hungry themselves." Today, on World Food Day, take a moment and thank a farmer.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, because there is a lot more of us where we come from. And it is currently 54 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs around 63, so a bit cooler from yesterday where we were in the mid-70s. But the reason being is that we have quite a bit of overcast and a steady rain this morning. Showers continuing in the afternoon, bringing with it about a quarter to a half inch of rain. We'll look forward to that, I guess. Yes, we will. Mostly cloudy overnight with a slight chance of a rain shower or 4 or 5. Lows will be in the low 50s, winds light and variable. And then partly cloudy skies tomorrow with highs back up in the mid-70s, winds light and variable, and should have a moderate drying out period until maybe the end of Sunday, and then we'll have another spot of rain. And like I say, we always like rain. We just don't want it to melt the snowpack. Don't do that. The predominant pollen out there that's rated here in our little town of Rogue River is ragweed pollen, and it is rated moderate. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 36 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is in the moderate range, but has clicked down a couple of levels to level 3. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.02 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 55 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 56 and sunny. Rome is 68 with rain, and they do have an advisory for heavy rain, potential disruption due to heavy rain. Kabul is 48 degrees with rain. Kyiv is 45 degrees and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 80 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 65 and clear. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 52 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 55 and partly cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 50 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 58 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Demetrius Nellis of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Greece's ruling New Democracy Party suffered a setback in yesterday's runoff elections for regional governors and mayors, losing the country's 2 largest cities and 5 of the 6 regional contests, yesterday being Sunday, of course. Prime Minister Mitsotakis had explicitly said that his goal was to win all 13 regions, plus the city of Athens, Thessalonica, and Piraeus. 13 plus 3, as he said. The results of the first round on last Sunday appeared to consolidate New Democracy's political dominance already expressed in the double national election last May and June. Its endorsed candidates won all 7 regions, whose result was decided in the first round, as well as Piraeus. This included 2 cases, Piraeus and the region of Crete, where New Democracy decided to hitch itself on the bandwagon of the incumbents, whom it had opposed in the previous local elections in 2019. But on Sunday yesterday, voters, at least those who bothered to turn out, inflicted a reality check on New Democracy's triumphalism. It was not an especially good night for New Democracy, Mitsotakis acknowledged, but he went on to say that it had become apparent in the October 8th first round, a contrast to his optimistic, if not triumphalist statements back then. The result that probably stung the most was in the capital, Athens, where a socialist-backed academic and political neophyte, Haris Doukas, beat incumbent Kostas Baikoyannis with nearly 56% of the vote. That was a massive upset, considering that Baikoyannis had scored over 41% in the first round, a little short of the 53% threshold required for an outright victory.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Praveen Menon of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Australian Indigenous leaders called yesterday Sunday for a week of silence and reflection after a referendum to recognize First Peoples in the Constitution was decisively rejected. More than 60%, that's 60, of Australians voted no in the landmark referendum on Saturday that asked whether to alter the Constitution to recognize Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people with an Indigenous advisory body, the Voice to Parliament, that would have advised Parliament on matters concerning the community. Australia's first referendum in almost a quarter of a century needed a national majority and majorities in at least 4 states to pass. All 6 states rejected the proposal. This is a bitter irony, the Indigenous leader said in a statement, that people who have only been on this continent for 235 years would refuse to recognize those whose home this land has been for 60,000 and more years is beyond reason. They said they would lower the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island flag to half-mast for the week and urged others to do the same. The outcome is a major setback for reconciliation efforts with the country's Indigenous community and damages Australia's image in the world regarding how it treats First Nations people. Unlike other nations with similar histories, such as Canada and New Zealand, Australia has not formally recognized or reached a treaty with its First Peoples. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.